Hi everyone, good afternoon. Happy International Women's Day. Yeah. So welcome to the panel, Diversity and Inclusion. Are we still talking about this? I'm going to start by introducing myself. I've been in the advertising, fashion and beauty industry for over 20 years. And most of that time I've been spent shooting beautiful campaigns around the world. And I recently co-directed and launched Catwalk to Creation, which is a docu-series on sustainable fashion. And I'm now a partner for Do Epic Good, which is a global content creation agency and production agency. At Do Epic Good, we work only with companies and brands who are ensuring their position of power is a force for good. We approach diversity and inclusion through staffing and geographically, having offices in 3 different countries around the world. Throughout my career, I've intuitively always championed diversity and inclusion, and it's something that's been very natural through all of my work, but I realise that isn't always the case everywhere. And actually, it's 7 years today since I launched my book, Women of the UAE, which is a cross-cultural communication tool, women in the Middle East. Which brings me to my topic today, and diversity and inclusion, are we still talking about this? And the answer is yes. And I want to introduce you to 3 people here who are on the panel today with me, incredible people who are doing some amazing things around the world. And I want to share their stories, their experiences, their inspiration, their advice and insight, and how we can all do things better. The first person I'd like to introduce you to is Uglow, Creative Director for Google Creative Lab. Uglow is a writer, a speaker, an innovation, inclusion, arts and culture, and digital futures. Leads Google's Creative Lab in Sydney, where they work on a range of projects with cultural organisations and practitioners globally to enable artists, writers, and performers to use digital tools to amplify or augment their artistic, theatrical, or musical practice. That's a real mouthful.
Sorry.
Welcome, T. Next person I want to introduce you to is Cacsmy Brutus, or Mama Cacs, who is a model, spokesperson and advocate. Mama Cacs is a Haitian American blogger and disability advocate. She consults with fashion brands and non-profits on the diversity and inclusion of people with disabilities. Cacs uses social media as a platform to talk about body positivity so she can dismantle the image of what people with disabilities should be or look like. Her innovative prosthetic leg and message on body positivity has landed her features in magazines such as Cosmopolitan, Essence and Glamour. Mama Cacs recently landed the September cover of Teen Vogue. So welcome, Mama Cacs. And last but certainly not least is Oliver Percovich, the Executive Director for Skateistan. Skateistan is an award-winning international organisation combining sport with life skills and education programs for children aged between 5 and 17 with a focus on girls, children living with disabilities and children from low-income backgrounds. Skateistan has skate schools and programs running in Afghanistan, Cambodia and South Africa. And Skateistan is helping to keep more children in education and is linked with learning lifelong values of friendship, teamwork and inclusion. Skateistan's skateboarding and arts-based education programs help to improve mental well-being, such as resilience, self-efficiency, self-esteem and trust. The organisation is the first international development initiative to combine skateboarding with educational outcomes and aims to give the youth the opportunity to become leaders for a better world. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So diversity and inclusion is not really it's not a new topic. It's been around for a really long time. And some countries are progressive, and some are still a long way behind. But diversity and inclusion doesn't just look at acceptance for women. This topic includes many others, including neurodiversity, mental health, transgender, disability, LGBTQ, and so many more. And today we want to focus on how corporations and companies and the entertainment communication industry can continue to embrace this conversation. So I have 3 questions I'm going to go through with each of the panellists, and we're going to answer them all in our unique way, okay? So the first question I will ask you, T, and this is for all of you. Can you walk me through some of your most memorable experiences illustrating why we are still talking about this.
Yeah. So, like that little list at the start, I come from a few of those points, and I work for Google. So we have obviously a big awareness of challenges we face, both with women and with issues around race, but also with issues around mental health and invisible disabilities like neurodiversity and our queer community. So there's a trans community. I'm trans. There's a trans community in Google, which is quite interesting, that has their own conference and is able to kind of be visible and represent themselves. It becomes much harder when you get to things like mental health, where it's still very stigmatized. It's still not something that I'm comfortable talking particularly about my mental health. And neurodiversity is another area where actually we ask people if they know what neurodiversity is, and they don't know what neurodiversity is. And if you don't know what neurodiversity is, it's an umbrella term to which encompasses all forms of neurological disadvantage, like autism or ADD or ADHD or dyslexia or dyspraxia or prosopagnosia, things which are structural in the brain and how that works. And they are what lead to very interesting spaces. And one of the reasons that we're still talking about it is that they're still used, all of these things are used as ways of othering us. Like within any society, and I from the UK, and at the moment, like the trans community are being ostracized or kind of like genuinely kind of pulled out, separated off. There are people use wedge issues like how trans people in prison should be treated, and you want to go, really? That's really how, or trans sports people, or trans kids, and you're like, these are people. This is a group who are struggling. Why is it that there is so much effort to other them, to make them different? So one of the problems with inclusion and diversity is that when we start talking about it, we start talking about these people, we create awareness that then leads to wedge issues, that leads to ways in which people who are not comfortable with that finding ways to make it about that group rather than how to include and incorporate that group.
Okay, and then over to you, Cax, as well.
So I think we've all sort of answered the question, why are we still talking about it? Because it's still an issue. People are still being excluded from, several things. And for me, my mission has always been to empower people with disabilities so that they can be proud of this identity and advocate for themselves. And disability or people with disabilities are the largest oppressed group. They intersect with so many other groups. We're talking queer, black, you name it. Yet we're still not invited to the diversity talk. When we talk about diversity, almost always disability is not taken into account, which is crazy to me. And even within my work now, well, my career has brought me to so many places. I started off in nonprofits, at the mayor's office, and now I work mostly as a model. One small example is me, for example, would be going on set and having the space not be accessible. And that brings me back to a much bigger issue. We want to talk about inclusion. Is it because we care about it, or is it because it's trending? Is it because we want to make a name for ourselves? And it shows when we're only doing it for visibility because we don't put effort into providing the proper accommodation. So I think we're in a space where we're not only talking about inclusion of people with disabilities, but also fair representation of people with disabilities.
There's one particular example that we talked about before. Would you be able to share that with us when you went on to set one time? It was for a makeup campaign.
Oh, several times that happens. And I feel like any black girls will tell you the same thing. You go on set, you don't really have anyone who carries your foundation. And especially if you're doing a makeup campaign, to me, that's unbelievable that you wouldn't have a makeup that matches my skin tone, which means you're about to market me to a group of people who think you're carrying their shade, but you're not. And a lot of us do carry our own little foundations with us, and we do our touch-ups whenever we look ashy or grayish because we're not wearing the right color. And it's just unacceptable. And it's not just the fashion industry. That carries over to so many other industries.
I think the language you're using, the idea of workplace accommodation should be something that everyone understands what that means. I remember being talked about accommodation for my accommodation and thinking, I have a house. I'm fine. And then the more that I've understood what companies like Google mean when they talk about accommodation, the more I've realized that needs to be a word that's just as common as inclusion, because without them, you don't have inclusion.
Yeah, very true. And Oliver, over to you.
So I guess in 2007, I travelled to Afghanistan. My girlfriend at the time got a job there, and I was looking for a job. And I knew what it was like to be, well, I'd heard a lot about what the role of women in society in Afghanistan was. And but all of the reading that I did couldn't prepare me for what the reality was, and just not seeing women driving cars or serving me in shops or riding bicycles. It was a really big shock. And Afghanistan is the third worst country in the world to be born a woman, after Syria and Yemen, in terms of opportunities and what can come out of that. And that's why it's still really it's still a reality today. From over the last 40 years, 40 years ago, 6 out of 10 girls finished primary education. Now it's 9 out of 10. So we've come a really, really long way in 40 years. Yet there's still a 10% that don't actually finish primary school, and they've been put in the too hard basket, and that's not acceptable at all. And that's why we have to keep on talking about it until that's actually, those sort of things are addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Which takes me on to my next question. What can everyone do to shift from the conversation to making it an action? And what can we do more of, or what do you think can happen? So, T, over to you.
I think we talk about empathy a lot, and we talk about empathy within the advertising world, and we talk about visibility. Sometimes those become a little challenging in themselves when we represent other communities than our own, because so often we kind of present imagery and present a problem that we are going to solve. And this is the same for it's very prevalent in the technology industry, which has a massive saviour complex and is forever thinking that they are going to save the world. And almost anything is presented in those kind of terms and that kind of terminology. And it places the groups that are being saved in a position of helplessness and vulnerability. You find, for example, within the autistic community, a lot of anger at being helped rather than simply accepted or included. You find, I think within the trans community, it's a very peculiar community in that we would really like to disappear. Like, I just don't want to have to be trans and be visibly trans. That's not something I need. So I don't want to be on the front page of a newspaper. I don't want everything to be like, it's just not a news story. But it is because people aren't able to simply accept and include, and instead you have this extraordinary othering, which is a very strange form of, someone called it a pathological, Liz calls it a pathological altruism.
Okay. You'll talk to me about that.
Oh yeah, like just the way in which we
I actually want you to talk to me a little bit about labeling.
now.
Yes, please.
I have all these labels. I'm trans and I'm queer and I'm face blind and I'm tall. I'm white. I'm well educated. We use all of these things to kind of define us, to put us into boxes. We don't really need them. I have identified as literally every different sexuality. I've done both kinds of straight. I've done gay man, I've done queer woman, I've done asexual. Like, when you've been through that process, you begin to realize that this whole labeling is kind of silly. This is not something that we need to do. And that because we do it, that's, again, how we use language to create difference so that we can separate people and pull them apart. I mean, and I think the thing that we were talking about earlier is that I also have a dissociative disorder, which is called dissociative identity disorder, which is a very funny label because it's been around for 10 years, but you will know it better as multiple personality disorder. And the reason we don't use multiple personality disorder is that label is completely inaccurate and also has only ever been represented as psychos who will turn up and kill you in your sleep. And I can kind of guarantee that's not who we are.
That's really good to know.
Well, you see, it's a joke. I'm a joke. It's a joke to have to even reference that problem that is something that I have to work through. So being public about that and bringing that into public awareness makes all of those other things seem kind of almost meaningless because at least they're not that scared that you're going to come after them with an axe.
So when you're compartmentalizing or using labels to compartmentalize this, can it be deeply positive or negative or both?
Oh, both. I mean, actually, that diagnosis, I'm not a great fan of diagnosis sometimes because it puts people in boxes and then they are treated a certain way. And more importantly, you feel a certain way. You act a certain way because you have been put in that box. But at the same time, sometimes it's incredibly helpful. So I'm face blind, and knowing that I'm face blind means that I know that I don't recognize people. I don't need to carry that guilt, which I've always carried. For all my, you know that your coping mechanisms are coping mechanisms. The dissociative stuff is like a framework within which I can understand my crazy, like why things don't make sense to me. And actually, people have spent most of their lives, or not, people have spent a lot of time trying to understand how my brain works. And it's something of a relief to be able to go, oh, yeah, there's no way, you can't understand how my brain works. I'm so sorry. And that's the creative part of who I am.
I really love what you were talking about, people not needing to be saved. And as soon as that happens, you've got a difference in the power dynamic, the person that is helping and the person that's being helped, and that doesn't help anybody. Mm-hmm. It has to be, we have to stay at eye level at all times, and I think that's
what inclusion means. It basically means everyone gets to work at the same level, and if you need to make accommodation for that, then you make accommodation for it so that everyone plays at the same level.
Really good point. Cax, over to you. I want you to talk me a little bit about through your blog and your modelling and just you being you.
We just talking about that in general, or following
in terms
up on
of
the question you asked?
Yeah.
Okay. I think in terms of action plan, one perfect example I can give was after I was featured on the cover of Teen Vogue, there was an article that someone wrote about how Teen Vogue is giving these women with disabilities a voice. And I had to comment saying they did not give us a voice. They amplified a voice. We gave ourselves voices. And unfortunately, I think a lot of inclusion is done in a savior sort of way, where people, well, when I'm talking about the disability narrative at least, people with disabilities are not part of the decision making, are not part of the solution. And it's more so about empowering people who are oppressed and then giving them the tools to actually make the changes in their community. But also when we talk about inclusion and action plan, it's thinking about as we mentioned before, providing the proper accommodations. Because a lot of the times, people don't think they can achieve certain goals if they haven't either seen anyone who looks like them in that space, or they know they're not given, or the proper tools are not available for them to do the work that they need to do. But also, not just when it comes to media, especially film, we are seeing more visibility of disability, but people with disabilities are not cast in those roles. So that's when you see this fine line between representation and tokenism. So if I'm not being hired and not getting paid, and I'm not part of the decision process, but we're seeing this random person who's not even, a true representation of people with disabilities, then that's even a deeper issue in itself.
So take action by actually meaning it.
Sorry?
Take action by actually meaning it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Oliver.
What can we do about it? I think whatever we have believing that we've got the chance to do it with whatever we have, whatever skills we have, and building on those. When I got first to Afghanistan, I felt really helpless. I thought, why am I not trained as a doctor or an engineer or somebody that can actually help in some sort of way? I'm just a lowly skateboarder, and I've worked in some different jobs. But then taking that and just taking action. I started some little skateboard sessions for girls. I gave girls more time to skateboard than the boys. Of course, they became better than the boys because they had more time to skateboard. And now, 10 years later, skateboarding is the largest sport for girls in Afghanistan. And northern Afghanistan has the highest concentration of female skateboarders anywhere in the world. So in a place where it seems so hopeless and so hard, and so change is possible, and we have to allow ourselves just to, be in that space and do something. And for me to not feel sorry for myself that I can't help in the way that I thought would be helpful, but simply being present in that environment and seeing what can I do, and what actually came from that was beyond my wildest imagination.
I know you said that you never went to Afghanistan with the thought of what actually happened. Can you walk me through some of the obstacles that you faced financially, and also what you achieved in terms of the schools that you've built out there? I mean, they're incredible. Can you just walk us through some of that, please?
So I guess being in Afghanistan in the first place, I was there for a couple of months, and then was running these little skateboard sessions, and then just realising, hey, I've got to just keep on doing this, but then not really having any money at all. So I was trying to get by on almost like $10 a week, and going to the market and finding the rotten vegetables, basically, that I could buy the cheapest potatoes and just get through it, because the kids were excited about what I had to offer, and I didn't want then, money to get in the way of that. It was like, well, I just have to make it happen. And all, other foreigners that were in Afghanistan thought that I was absolutely, totally nuts. Like, you're actually going out into the street and doing these sessions without bodyguards and armoured cars and all of that. And I was like, I had the street kids to look after me, and they knew how to stay safe in those spaces more than anybody else really did. So that was, and then I guess the big one was really just making sure that it could grow, and that was then making sure that there wasn't any sort of it didn't feel like cultural imperialism or some sort of Western culture taking over in any sort of way. So it was just a skateboard, a board with four wheels, and there wasn't anything else that was associated with
No
it.
barriers.
So that was another part. That was a big barrier to overcome, to just gain the acceptance of the parents of the kids, that I wasn't brainwashing their kids in any way, and I was simply trying to give them a platform and build it up. In Kabul, there's been 1,800 suicide attacks since I started Skateistan 10 years ago. So it's lucky to be able to avoid all of that. There are those sort of challenges, but I was in Afghanistan a week ago, and the programs are growing. It's like we built Mazar-i-Sharif with the idea of having 1,000 students weekly. They've got goals of 1,600 students weekly this year. It's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's really exciting to that seed that was planted in fertile soil can grow.
How many kids now have you put through your schools?
We have 2,500 children weekly that are part of our programs around the world, and there's been around 8,000 kids that have been part of the programs globally.
Incredible. Really incredible. Well done. Just as the screen goes off. So my last question for all of you. How is your work individually advancing the SDGs to ensure we're not going to be talking about this conversation in 5 years' time?
It's always rather hard. It just feels, I think this is something everyone struggles with. It's like, how are you doing, how are you making a difference? It's like, what on earth are you doing? And a lot of my work is with culture and technology and inclusion and machine learning. And those are kind of interesting areas, but from an advocacy perspective, I think the most interesting things that we're doing is working with the families of trans kids and the parents of trans children to try and create an environment where trans kids can grow up supported, so that they don't then become this... One of the funniest things is watching a society pushing back on giving kids the treatment that they need for a disorder that they are aware they have before that disorder becomes a significant point of suffering for them. We literally are saying, oh, no. They need to suffer before we can begin to treat them. And that is happening everywhere. That is the common discussion point. So for me, a very simple goal is to allow that entire generation to grow up supported by society and by their parents, so that they don't suffer. They never need to suffer. We have a cure for this. It's called acceptance and inclusion. It doesn't even cost anything.
Really well said. There's something that you said to me when we spoke about this last time that really stuck with me, and you related it to a vaccine. Can you tell us that again, please?
Yeah.
Do you remember that one?
I don't know. I think it was more like that idea of like if you did have like a polio vaccine or like vaccines at the moment, this whole notion that you might not give your children a vaccine. You might expose them to the threat of suffering when you don't need to. Like, why would you? No parent would do that. And yet we are having a debate about whether that is the right thing to do. Whether the right thing to do is to make them suffer this condition of dysphoria, which is crippling, lifelong, and frankly, transition is not a cure. It's a palliative solution that allows me to stay alive.
So by not supporting trans children, you're effectively not allowing them to have a vaccine.
Exactly that.
It's a really good point. Cax, over to you.
I think for me, the simplest way would probably bring it back to social media. When I first started using social media, I recall seeing sort of like images of people with disabilities. Whenever I'd see someone with a prosthetic, they'd be sort of like strong, they'd be military guys, they'd be athletes, but a lot of the times when they were POCs, they were just like homeless or poor children or people in war zones. And I knew there were so many, stories of POC people of disabilities who were different from that, and I wanted to show it. So I started by telling my story and then sharing myself with my audience. And when one of my pictures went around, people were saying they had never seen a black girl with a prosthetic before. And to me, I thought it was absurd. I rock climb with a lot of girls with disabilities who have prosthetics, but people weren't seeing that. And a lot of it was not having the pride to sort of like show yourself, so everyone was hiding their prosthetic. So for me, my biggest goal was living my truth, being myself, embracing myself, loving myself, but most importantly, empower other girls to do the same. So I started sort of like decorating my crutches, my prosthetic, and I don't know if you guys can see this one. It's like a nice purple one.
Cool, very
I
cool.
actually have like 18 of those that I match with like my outfits. And it seems like such a simple thing, but the way it changes how you see yourself and how you interact with others is really grand. And I wanted to have other people experience that. So I started taking that outside of social media and doing different talks with younger girls, especially girls with disabilities, so that they can embrace themselves. Because when you have a generation of little girls who are embracing themselves and loving themselves, they become the advocates of tomorrow.
How long did it take you to become that role model and be comfortable become that role model?
Whew, I think I'm still working towards that. But the perfect example would be, so as you mentioned before, my legal name is Cacsmy, but my blogging name is Mama Cacs. And I created that persona so I could sort of like deal with a lot of the trauma. After my surgery, I was left with a lot of scars, not being able to sort of like accept my new body. And I was like, I'm gonna create this sort of like role model figure that's gonna give me advice, that's fearless, 60-year-old woman. I just had this image in my head of this like badass girl. And I can say I created that person maybe 7 years ago, and maybe a year and a half ago, I became that person. So it's taken me a long time. Yeah.
Congratulations. Oliver.
So in terms of the SDGs, quality education is something that is so important, and I think it's a very interesting conversation. What actually constitutes quality education and what is actually readying children for what's coming over the next even like 50 years. Not many people have very good answers around that. And we're really trying to think outside the box in terms of what can constitute a quality education. And then gender equality and creating opportunities for inclusive opportunities for for the students and also within the organisation. So 54% of the salaries that I pay I have over 100 staff, 54% of those salaries go to women, and that's a small step in terms of creating role models of where that can go. Strong role models are really important. I'm interested to see what role the Tokyo 2020 Olympics will have in terms of countries that haven't had skateboarding in them, and skateboarding being in Tokyo 2020 for the first time. And we're going to see most of the growth in the next 50 years in Africa, no doubt. Economically, population-wise, lots of opportunities are going to open up, and I'm sure that there's going to be a whole lot more girls skateboarding on the African continent within the next 5 years, probably because of the influence of skateboarding being included in Tokyo 2020. So where there's different. I think we just want to stay relevant, and the skateboard was something that spoke to these kids on the street in Kabul 10 years ago. The little girl just having the guts to try it out when she knows that the adults all around are really disproving of her doing that. How can we keep on being relevant, and how can we keep on creating new role models where one girl having the guts to do it showed that all of these other girls that, hey, they can also do it because she's doing it. How can these new role models continue to be created?
One question I have for you is, as the girls grow up, they reach a certain age, and then they come up against barriers. Can you walk me through those barriers, and then your thoughts on how you're going to be able to support sort of gender equality and try and get them back into skateboarding so that the boys don't overtake them and they can keep to be the best at skateboarding as they are when they're a little bit younger?
Yeah, the barriers to participation are huge, and we work in South Africa and Cambodia and Afghanistan, but Afghanistan's definitely has the biggest biggest barriers to participation. Girls are being married off as young as 8 years of age. There's a lot of kids that are getting pushed into prostitution at an early age because of pressures from family, drug addiction in families, so there's these very, very large, huge barriers that we're up against, but slowly there is the ability to chip away at that by building up the 60% of our staff are former students, so they understand what those kids have gone through, and they have then the best chance to relate to them and to help them through through what those challenges are. And so I just need to be able to support where I can. Okay, if we need to provide transportation to get these girls to be included, we do a lot of adaptive skateboarding with children without that have lost different limbs or cognitive disabilities, or we've got a really big deaf program in both Cambodia and South Africa, and we even got a special a new sign in Khmer Sign Language for skateboarding, which is that. So that's been included, and that's come from our program. So it's a matter of helping people do what they can. So that was a big part of that, is the giving opportunities to these street working kids that are then coming through the program and giving them bigger opportunities, and then tying them into a larger network globally. Being invited to speak here today, huge honour, and it then creates a bigger network for those kids in our programs.
Are the parents seeing the success stories of their children being involved in Skateistan?
I think the biggest thing that the parents see is that their children are better behaved. That's what they're saying to us. And it's so funny because people don't normally associate skateboarders as the best behaved bunches. But, in Afghanistan, skateboarding is synonymous with education. And
brilliant when you've got no societal barriers, isn't it? It's excellent. Keep going, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to add into that at all, T?
Not.
Come on, you've usually got quite a lot to say.
Well, I'm slightly in awe of the degree to which, and I see this a lot, is that actually a lot of especially when there are structural things to overcome, that a lot can be done by people with passion, like individuals with passion, whether that's Mama Cats, whether it's Skateistan, that actually a lot of the things that we come to celebrate are not the big programs run by the big companies, but they're people getting into their communities and making a difference at a personal level. And when we talk about visibility, like, it isn't about being represented, like us being represented on the covers of things. It's about our stories being told to other people, about standing up. And it is so extraordinary when you stand up and you find out that you are talking to people who have never heard their story told. That is an amazing thing, and that's actually the reason I keep standing up. So I think it is wonderful to be sitting here. It is an honor to be sitting here. I mean, what am I doing sitting here? What do you But yeah, when we talk about representation, like, and inclusion and diversity, it is really about including those people and giving them voices, including disabled people, and allowing people to. So we have a big thing about design sort of by and with disability rather than for disability, because this is a great problem in the design industry, is this kind of like, oh, we were designed for disability, and it's no, let's design with disabled people. Working with communities, raising them up, creating accommodations so that the conversation can be with them. Like, that's what this whole conversation needs to be about, as opposed to the reason we're having to have a conversation with that title is because actually people, industry, people who do not feel that they need accommodation are trying to save us rather than just including us. Yep. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Brilliant, lovely. On that note, I just want to say a very, very big warm thank you to all three of you. I know that pretty much like me, you are either travelled a long way to get here or you're incredibly jet lagged and it's the middle of the night for you. We can't tell. Hopefully you can't tell. But thank you. Thank you for being a part of today and sharing your stories.